For the first 3 quilts I have made in this series, I made quilts inspired by the pointillism of George Seurat and the Great Wave by Hokusai. The 4th quilt in this series was inspired by the pop art of Roy Lichtenstein. In the wake of the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. in April of 1968 and Robert F. Kennedy in June of 1968, gun access and gun control became part of an especially intense national debate. That June, Time magazine commissioned Roy Lichtenstein to create a cover that addressed this debate. Lichtenstein adapted the felt banner called Pistol that he made in 1964 to create the 1968 Time magazine cover, The Gun in America. That's the image I used for the inspiration of my next quilt. I wanted to create a quilt that explored the idea of tension, so when selecting a quilt block pattern that I could use for the background of the quilt, I found a black and white image of a quilt that was made with the traditional Ohio star block. While very traditional, the black and white design also had the feel of an op art work of the 1960s. I knew I'd have to replicate it in shades of blue, so I wasn't sure if that effect would be seen, but I still liked the traditional feel of the block. On April 19, 2025, I made plastic templates for the individual pieces of the block and began to cut up my fabric. I started making individual rows and then individual sections, and by May 26, I had the background pieced together. I knew that a lot of that handwork was going to be hidden by the applique, but I didn't know how else to proceed. I used Adobe Illustrator to trace the design, printed it out on poster paper, and used the printout to make a pattern for the large black piece. I needle-turn appliqued that piece onto the background. I then just had to add the rest of the pieces. Since I was using light-colored fabrics on a dark background, I had to line every single piece to avoid shadowing. That's the unintended and undesirable effect, where a dark fabric shows through a lighter semi-opaque applique piece place on top of it. The last step to finish the front of the quilt was to add the border. I then had to find a background fabric, and I luckily found this fabric from a Robert Kaufman collection called Constitution. Once I layered the background fabric, the batting, and the front piece, I just had to baste the 3 layers together to begin quilting. Given the round barrel of the gun and the polka dots in the hand, I wanted to use circular quilting patterns. For the traditional background, I used a traditional feathered wreath design. I realized that the round design left large, unquilted spaces in the corners of the squares, so I eventually quilted a smaller version of the feathered wreath where those corners met. I used a more op art circular quilting design for the hand, gun, and yellow smoke. It was modern, and it actually reminded me of those target shooting designs. I started in the center of the barrel of the gun and worked out from there. I finally finished all the quilting in January 2026, and then I just had to turn over the border and whip stitch it to the back, add a fabric sleeve to hang the quilt, and add a signature plate. I named the piece by the artwork's more commonly used title, Gun in America. I am so proud that every stitch of this quilt was hand-stitched. And here's the finished quilt. Thanks for watching.